Welcome to question 22 of Prima Secunda of the Summa Theologica, and with question 22, we now are out of the last treatise, which was on human actions peculiar to man, and now we've entered into a relatively long treatise on the passions. 22 to 48, those questions, starting with this one today on the subject of the soul's passions. It only has 3 articles, so it's relatively brief, but I did find it interesting when you think of passions, which he'll define in this these articles. But as I go to look for images of, to put on these slides, and when I type in passions or passion, it is almost entirely dealing with sexuality, as in this is like the only thing that people relate to passion. But of course, passion is much broader to St. Thomas Aquinas. And so when I went to go look for pictures that, were not going to be pornographic or something that just looks inappropriate, I had to put in the word emotions. And emotions will give you a lot broader of a range. So passions and emotions are very similar to St. Thomas Aquinas, but in our culture today, I guess since we're so focused on sexuality, people think of passion as being sexuality almost exclusively, but it's a whole lot more than that. So let's get into Article 1 of this treatise on the passions, and it is of the subject of the soul's passions, whether any passion is in the soul. And he says the word passive is used in 3 ways. First, in a general way, according as whatever receives something is passive, although nothing is taken from it. Thus, we may say that the air is passive when it is lit up. All right, so this is the kind of classical definition of passivity, right? Where Thomas talks a lot about potentiality and active and potential, right? When something is in potentiality. But this is to be perfected rather than to be passive. So really it's to be perfected rather than passive. Secondly, the word passive is employed in its proper sense when something is received while something else is taken away. And this happens in 2 ways. For sometimes that which is lost is unsuitable to the thing. Thus, when an animal's body is healed and loses sickness, okay, so it changes. The sickness goes away, and that's good. It's gone, but it doesn't have what it had previously. At other times, the contrary occurs. Thus, to ail is to be passive because the ailment is received and health is lost. And here we have passion in its most proper acceptation. For a thing is said to be passive from its being drawn to the agent. And when a thing recedes from what is suitable to it, then especially does it appear to be drawn to something else. All right, so passions in this sense have to do with a change that occurs in something. He says, moreover, Aristotle states that when a more excellent thing is generated from a less excellent, we have generation simply and corruption in a particular respect, whereas the reverse is the case when from a more excellent thing a less excellent is generated. In these 3 ways it happens that passions are in the soul. For in the sense of mere reception, we speak of feeling and understanding as being a kind of passion. Okay, so when you understand, you're just going from not understanding to understanding, or not feeling to feeling. But that's the way he says is not typically what mostly Aquinas is talking about here. Okay, but passion accompanied by the loss of something is only in respect of a bodily transmutation. Wherefore passion properly so called cannot be in the soul, save accidentally, insofar as the composite is passive. But here again we find a difference, because when the transmutation is for the worse, it has more of the nature of a passion than when it is for the better. Hence, sorrow is more properly a passion than joy. So he seems to be saying here that passions more are negative, things that happen to us that, I don't know, I think of equally the good passions and the bad passions, and he's actually going to treat a lot about good passion. So I don't quite understand what he's getting at there, but he's quoting Aristotle. And so, anyways, Article 2, whether passion is in the appetitive rather than in the apprehensive part. Now, we talked about this a lot. Appetitive has to do with desire, moving towards something, right? Like sensitive appetites, or the will is an appetitive power. Apprehensive means you're apprehending something. It has to do with reason, knowledge, right? Epistemology, coming to know something, apprehending it. He says the word passion implies that the patient is drawn to that which belongs to the agent. Now, the soul is drawn to a thing by the appetitive power rather than by the apprehensive power, because the soul has, through its appetitive power, an order of things as they are in themselves. Hence, Aristotle says that good and evil, that is, the objects of the appetitive power, are in things themselves. All right, so we're drawn to the pizza or the hot fudge sundae or the chips and salsa because there's something good about them. It's good in themselves. On the other hand, the apprehensive power is not drawn to a thing as it is in itself, but knows it by reason of an intention of the thing, which intention it has in itself or receives in its own way. It's interesting that he uses the word intention, because when we were talking about human acts, last treatise, intention, remember, had to do with the will. And so I'm a little confused about this, but not the first time. And so remember, in human epistemology, there's a passive intellect that has the potential for universal being, right? We can know all things, but it's the active intellect that goes and lights up the phantasms where we can actually know something. So apprehension, it's in us. But okay, so I'll just leave it at that. Hence we find stated that the true and the false, which pertain to knowledge, are not in things, but in the mind. Consequently, it is evident that the nature of passion is consistent with the appetitive rather than with the apprehensive part. So when God creates something like a frog or a tree, there is a substance there, and there's a form and a matter. There's informed matter, and it has the four causes, which one of them is well, you have the formal cause, the efficient cause, the final cause, and the material cause, right? So, but he's saying that the knowledge is in us, and we're not drawn to it. It's challenging, because it seems like the truth of it would be in it also. And there's a correspondence theory of philosophy where what the truth in the thing, it corresponds to what we believe it to be, and then that's how we know truth, right? So I'll just leave that at that. Article 3, whether passion is in the sensitive appetite rather than in the intellectual appetite, which is called the will. So in the last article, he determined that the passion is more in the appetitive than in the apprehensive. So he's eliminated the apprehensive, which has to do with reason, and I mentioned that the appetitive is either sensitive appetite or intellectual appetite, which is the will. So now he's saying, well, which one is it that the passions have to do with? And he says passion is properly to be found where there is corporeal transmutation. Corporeal, of course, referring to the body. This corporeal transmutation is found in the act of the sensitive appetite, and it is not only spiritual, as in the sensitive apprehension, but also natural. Now, there is no need for corporeal transmutation in the act of the intellectual appetite, because this appetite is not exercised by means of a corporeal organ. The will, remember, the will and the intellect, understanding intellectual operations, are not in a corporeal organ. They're not in the brain. They're outside, or not physically outside, but they're not attached to necessarily a organ of the body, right? We learn that when we in the Treatise on Human Nature. It is therefore evident that passion is more properly in the act of the sensitive appetite than that of the intellectual appetite, and this is again evident from the definitions of Damascene quoted above, which would have been in another part, one of the objections, or maybe the sed contra or something. Okay, so that gives us a little bit of a starting point for studying the soul's passions. A little bit of confusion there, that just in my mind, but that's me. It's nothing wrong with the text. It's just me trying to wrestle with these things. But that'll get us started. The next, tomorrow, we're going to get a lot more into the different types of passions, the concupiscible, the irascible. It's very interesting to the different, he'll list them all, the 11 passions that a human person primarily has. And so it is quite interesting as we get going here on this treatise on the passions. And that'll do it for question 22. Thanks for joining me as we travel through the Summa, one question at a time.